Everybody.
Libietsky.
Hey, man.
Hey. What's going on?
Not too much. Jemmy, are you there?
I'm here.
Proof of Jemmy.
Where I only see you and me and Corey.
Well, Serena is there.
Serena's here.
And Anne and Judith.
I see you.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Judith Kahn.
Oh,
Yeah,
and
get
there's
your
three
little,
more people in the waiting room. Woohoo.
See you.
Weirdness. Oh, hold
Hello,
on.
Pam.
I am experiencing technical difficulties.
Hate when that happens.
Okay, there we go. Now I got some peeps. All right. Who's got the beautiful birds outside? Nice.
Not me. I'm sitting by an open window.
Oh, I love it.
I don't open my window. What is
Hi,
it?
Barb.
Hi.
Okay, so we have Serena Leedy, Myra, Patty, Judy, Anne, Megan, and Barb. Great.
All our favorite students.
These are the best
Yes,
students.
they're all here, the best ones.
So for some of you, I think this is the first time meeting Corey, and this is the second session, but if you did not come to the first session, that's completely okay. So Corey, I'll tell you what, I am sort of scrambling to find my—
What's wrong?
Well, it's all good. I'm just trying
What's
to
going
find—
on? You need to talk?
Hold on. I'll tell you what, let me just, I got to clear out a couple of windows that I'm not using in order to see the windows that I want, and then we'll start.
Doing some shoe shopping?
That's how some people de-stress.
Yes, yes. I'm going to try it. It's time. It's a new season. Did we lose the rabbi? I think we have. Megan, are you frozen or are you?
I flipped my phone. Hold on.
Very still. Okay.
I'll get back
I
there.
know some people listen really still. Oh, shall I admit Josh Rose back in? I guess so. I guess so. That was a moment, though. That was an opportunity for us to not have an adult in the room.
That was so Bush League.
But we let you in. We let you back in.
Yeah, I really, really super appreciate it. Okay. So I am, so I know that there are a couple of folks who were hoping to be on today, but may not be able to join us, but we are recording this. So that is okay. And that's how they will be able to tune in. And I'll tell you what, Corey, why don't you, as I get my ducks in a row here and get my, get the sheet in front of me that I need, why don't you just give us a 30-second framework of what our topics are, and then I will dive in with my sources, okay?
Okay, that sounds good. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Corey.
Welcome back. Good to see you, Anne. Are you making a scarf, Anne?
No, I'm making a baby dress.
Oh, that's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I assume there's a baby in your world. But
Hello. It is my new granddaughter.
Ah, mazel tov.
Bo says hi.
Hello.
Nice.
Hello, creatures.
Actually, so Corey, sorry, one thing to interrupt here. One thing you'd be super interested in that Anne is doing is Anne earlier knitted various viruses. In fact, she did all kinds of pathogens that she knitted.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
They're on my Facebook page. If you want to be my Facebook friend, you can see them.
I'd like to see them. It might be worth going on Facebook just to see those. Are they actual size?
Who said that?
So you're knitting really small?
No, they're
they're big.
Yes, they're microscopic. It's amazing.
That's amazing.
Small needles.
There's a great poem by Patty Ann Rogers, and she writes about God knitting the universe together. And she uses she for God in her poem, and she talks about how she had to like use like filaments of light to sew them to make things. It's really
Oh,
beautiful.
that's awesome.
Use a knitting and sewing metaphor for creation. I'll have it sent to y'all if you want.
I would love that.
Hold on, sorry. We're desperately trying to get us started, but I can't resist that because I'm reading this Kabbalistic text of the Ramchal Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, which was written in, I think, the 15th century, 16th century. And in it, he talks about this Kabbalistic idea, which is precisely that he actually deliberately and importantly uses the metaphor of weaving, of the universe being woven together by the attributes of judgment, mercy, and love. And anyway, so for the Kabbalists among us who are learning with me, the root that the word that is translated as weaving is Resh Chaf Vav, which also happens to be the root of the word Merkava. So if you've heard of Merkava or chariot mysticism, it has an interesting double valence. Okay, here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a class about Kabbalah, nor is it about knitting. Corey Pressman.
But it's about all these things.
That's right, and more. And Corey's going to give us a framework for what we're going to talk about today, and then I'm going to dive in and give some Jewish reflections.
Excellent. So hello again. So last time if you were here or not, it's been recorded. And I also have the sheet that I was drawing on as an image, so we can share that with everybody too. But what we've been talking about, the arc that we're on is. I guess I mean that literally as the arc of the story we're telling, but then the boat that's carrying us through this flood of information is the beginning was about the concept of the biology of stress, the anatomy of stress. Because in so many healing, in pretty much all the healing traditions, the healing can't happen if you're in a stressed out state of mind, basically. But it's not just a state of mind, it's a state of body and mind. And when you learn about the anatomy of stress, you begin to see how pervasive it is and how it doesn't allow for anything beyond the stress to happen. So we talked about the sympathetic nervous system and how to breathe through your sympathetic nervous system and regain your parasympathetic nervous system, which allows you to actually think with your brain and to get past the panic, essentially, just so you can get oriented and start making decisions again. It's kind of like when you're stressed, you become a lizard version of yourself, which is totally normal. I don't want to demonize the lizards inside you. It's a normal response to perceived threat, but you'll recall the issue with human beings is that we tend to perceive threats when there aren't actual threats there. It's the double-edged sword of our imagination. So you can wind up in a state of chronically perceiving threat, therefore in a state of chronically being stressed out or chronically anxious. It's not serving you at that point. So it's good to find a way to mitigate that stress, get back into your brain and move forward. So we kind of just talked about the anatomy of that. Does that sound right? Is that what we talked about?
Yeah, why did we spend 90 minutes on it if you just so beautifully summarized it in 30 seconds?
Yes, I appreciate it. I'm glad you dug the summary. But we went into details. We talked about parts of the nervous system, and then we also grooved on actual methods. We did the wet noodle, remember that?
Yep.
We wet noodled, and we relaxed our pelvises, and in so doing hacked our vagal nerve and returned to cortical thinking, at least for a brief while. I know you get knocked out of that, but getting that skill of what we were calling checking and choosing is a skill that allows you to actually interact with the universe as a human being. And you can't really be the change you want to see in the world if you're in that sympathetic nervous system state. So we've found a way around it. And so today's class is more about how to find the energy to manage that. And then once you're in that state of mind, how do you continue to gain energy so that you can be the most energized and engaged human possible? Does that sound like worth talking about for a little while?
Absolutely does to me.
Right. All right. Hi, Heather Penner. So, Rabbi, would you like me to continue on my journey, or do you want to step in a little bit?
You know, I'd be happy to step in, but I am curious about this. Corey and Heather, how do you guys know each other? Because Heather indicated that she was familiar with you. Or is that not true?
It is true. I just sent you a little note, Rabbi. Corey and I have known each other for a long time from our mobile app development days.
Wow.
It's true.
Isn't that crazy? It's a small world.
Yeah.
So yeah, Heather,
if I had known she'd be here, I wouldn't have agreed to do this.
Right.
We'll get past this.
Right. You again as well.
Right. So Heather, you weren't aware that I had a connection to this guy for some time. Okay. Anyway, so what I want to do is I want to, just as we did last time, I'm going to share some perspectives from the Jewish tradition on the broad topic that Corey just discussed, which is the sources of vitality and sources of joy within the Jewish tradition. I want to focus first on the idea of joy in the Jewish tradition. And then later on, after Corey makes his presentation and talks about different practices connected to his themes for today, I will then talk about practices related to this. But right now, I want to talk kind of conceptually about how the topic of vitality and joy is discussed in the Jewish tradition. So I'm going to share my screen in what even a month ago seemed to me to be like very high level of technological savvy, until Corey last week just shattered my ego with his technological magic, which I'm sure he'll bust out again today, as you will see.
Ego shattering is healthy.
Yeah, it's true. So for right now, what we have is a page of text. Are you all seeing pages of text in front of you? Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
So it's interesting because our tradition has so much gravitas. It is so intense and has so much solemnity in it, that and seriousness and serious of approach and sobriety. And all of those things are true, because in Torah we grapple with the deepest issues of existence. Existence is not always, the world is hard, and our tradition is very grounded in reality and recognizes that. And it's also true that the concept of simcha, of joy, of happiness, is a through line in our tradition, and a concept that is incredibly theologically important. And I guess what I want to where I want to bring this is the notion that in the Jewish tradition, happiness is not just one of various modes of mood that can be kind of selected, but actually it's fundamental. And being able to access it is, and being able to access joy is fundamentally important to the Jewish theological project. So what I want to share with you now are texts that talk about this, and then we'll talk a little bit later about what does it mean to access it, and what are the kind of spiritual implications of being in a state in which you cannot access it, right? And let me just frame that for a moment, that the how this plays out in our lives. We very often, as religious people, we sort of segment our lives, right? So we have our working life, and we have our home life, and then we also make time for synagogue or different communities that we might be involved in, or our spiritual life. But what I want us to think about is the ways in which that spiritually speaking, religiously speaking, those divisions are artificial, because being in a stress state and being in a frame of mind in which you're really finding it hard to access vitality and joy is fundamentally in tension with the capacity to relate to God and to worship God and to live, I would say, live a full life of Torah and mitzvah. Now, to be sure, and this is one of the things we're going to talk about, when we're in a place of darkness, whether it's a kind of immediate situational anxiety or whether it's a larger challenge we're facing in our lives, of course, our religious tradition must and does address ways to get out of that, to bring us to open our hearts. But I'm simply trying to make the point that being in a state of openness and being able to address stress really is a religious skill, right? It's not just about how do I manage my work so I can, be more effective and be more happy at work. It's not that narrow. It has broader spiritual implications. Okay, so one of the very, very famous passages in the Psalms is from Psalms. Who thinks they can turn this into a song? Who knows the melody? Don't be embarrassed. What's the melody? If you can read the Hebrew. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. I love it. I heard humming. No one has the courage to bring it forth, but I will do it. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, lefanav birnana. And I'll spare you the nigun part of that. But this little passage from the Psalms, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, is really very well known, but more than that, is incredibly profound. And I want us to think about something here, because I think it's going to get to some of the things I think that Corey is going to talk about. Yivdu et Hashem b'simcha. For the Hebrew readers among you, and if you don't read Hebrew, that's okay. I'll explain this. But can any of the Hebrew readers access this first word and tell me what are its meanings? What does this come from? Ayin bet dalid.
Oved. Oved.
Okay, and what is Oved? Where do we first?
Work.
Right. Okay, so in modern Hebrew, it means avodah is work. What is it? Where does it first show up in the Torah?
Isn't it somebody's name?
That's awesome. Actually, I think you're right. Technically, that might be the first place it appears. But you're
like Eved being a slave.
Yeah, that's right. Avadim hayinu. I just can't stop singing. Avadim hayinu, hayinu. So we were slaves. Avadim. So I think it was Marilyn who said that the word oved means to work in modern Hebrew. Avodah, like I'm going to my avodah, I'm going to my work, going to my job. The reason that it has that valence is because in the Torah, an Eved is a worker, or in the context of Egypt, a slave. And what's important is that the cherut of the Jewish people, the freedom of the Jewish people, the redemption of the Jewish people is not going, it's not about going from being an Eved to then being completely free. It's about being an Eved of Pharaoh, a servant of Pharaoh, to becoming an Eved of God. Right? And God makes that clear. This is not just my riff on this. God makes that clear in the Torah. It's very clear that the Israelites continue to be avadim. They continue to be, we don't like the sound of slaves to God, doesn't really capture really what our tradition is about, but it's the same word in the Hebrew. And so the point of this is that when it says serve God, and there's, the word it comes from servant, right? Be a servant of God in joy, is that in the Jewish tradition, joy does not come from being relieved of all burdens, right? Happiness does not come from being relieved of all obligations. That's sort of sometimes I think in the Western European or in the American imagination, that's what happiness means, right? We go on vacation to get away from everything, and then we can be happy. Well, Jewishly speaking, that's a nightmare world. The nightmare world where we're free of all obligation. We are therefore free of all relatedness, right? If I have no connection to anybody and nobody I have to be in serving relationship to, I have no purpose. And if I have no purpose, I can have no joy. So that becomes a really central idea in Jewish spirituality, that my happiness is tied together with a sense of purpose and with the sense that I have work to do in the world, okay? Because that puts me in relationship to God, and it puts me in relationship to other people. And this is a really, really important thing to remember. Now, hold on. Corey, they're just pouring in now.
Yeah, they heard you talking from
Yeah.
wherever they are. They sensed it.
That's right. Oh wait, why am I still seeing Ethel on my screen? Hold on.
What's wrong with seeing us?
Well, nothing, but you want to see me too, don't you?
No.
Okay.
You.
So, okay. So now, as part of another conversation, we can talk about how joy ought to inform our work as Jews in the world, and the fact that often our religious lives don't feel joyful. They feel kind of mundane and boring. And, that's something that as a rabbi, in part, it's my job to work on, and in part, it's your job. That's a separate conversation. But the idea is that our joy comes from our service. And this psalm is saying that our service ought to be filled with joy, bringing those two things together. Does that make sense? Questions or comments about that? Okay. So that's one aspect of it. Do people remember, actually, it'll hurt my feelings if you don't, so everyone's going to just say yes to this, okay? Do you remember when I had that discussion with Robert Diener, who's the happiness expert? Now I'll never know if you're telling the truth or not. But so Robert and I did a deep dive. Robert Diener, amazing guy and a friend of mine, a happiness researcher. He and I had a dialogue as part of the What's the Big Idea speaker series, in which we talked about happiness. And some of these texts that I'm referring to here tonight, I think that I talked today. I think I talked about in my conversation with Robert. But Pirkei Avot, which we are all studying. There's a tradition of studying between Passover and Shavuot. This beautiful little chapter from the Mishnah that is wisdom literature. It's unlike any other part of the Mishnah. And Avot asks the question, Ez zehu ashir? Sameach bechalko. So this word sameach that's in bold here is the same word here, right? See that? I'm sort of feebly trying to up whatever technological advantage I can, just in anticipation of Corey's teaching
You're
here.
really overselling my property.
I know, that's part of my strategy.
This is a tactic, yeah.
Exactly, it's part of what I'm angling for. They're going to be like, oh, that's how he.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so these two words are the same, right? Here it has the letter hey at the end, and here it doesn't, but it's the same root, simcha. So who is the person who has simcha? Who's the person who is happy? Excuse me, who's the person who is rich? The person who is happy bechelko, with his lot, or with her lot. That is with his, literally the thing that is theirs, the thing that has been apportioned to them. And this is not something for which we need Torah wisdom. We all have the sense that that happiness is not bound up in seeking things we don't have, but rather in being happy with the things that we do have. But we know that intellectually, but we forget it constantly, right? We always believe, and it's we shouldn't feel badly about this, because it's built into our humanity. It's built into the way that we were made. The Kabbalah, for those again studying Kabbalah with me, we'll go into this as we move forward in our Kabbalah work. But it's part of our design that our innate state is to think that we become happier by acquiring things for ourselves that we don't have. But the reason that we are called Jews is because of the word Yehudim, and the root of that being, anybody remember what is that word? I think Sarah Sturtz just said the word gratitude, but I couldn't hear it because she's muted, right? The word Yehuda, Yehudi, comes from the word to acknowledge or to give thanks. And that, of course, really ultimately gratitude is a strategy of changing your brain to be aware of the current state of whatever it is that you're facing at that moment. It might be that you're facing the situation of getting a brand new toaster oven, and that makes you so incredibly happy. Or it might just be the fact that you woke up in the morning. And remember, I was at a funeral yesterday. I led the funeral for those, the niece of Frida Cohen, who many of you know, passed away. Frida's niece passed away. And I was we were reflecting on the fact that at a funeral or whenever you get any bad news, you say, Baruch Dayan Emet, right? Blessed is the judge of truth is literally what it means. But setting aside the content of setting aside the words themselves, the point is that you're making a blessing of gratitude even when a difficult thing befalls you, which intellectually often seems far beyond our grasp or even emotionally. But at the core of it is this idea that that is really where our happiness is in finding something to find beauty in every dimension of our lives, no matter what happens to us. And that is how we become happy with our lot. It's a very, very deep Jewish principle. Okay, I'm gonna leave this guy behind for a moment. And I just have two more texts with two more ideas, and then I'm going to turn it over to Corey in just a moment. But Sarah Sturtz raised her hand.
Did. Any chance of making that text larger?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good question.
I'm remembering a text that we used to sing with Rav Aryeh that was, I don't remember it in Hebrew. We sang it in Hebrew and in English, but in English it was, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav used to say, friends, do not despair, for a difficult time is upon us, our joy must fill the air. Which was always a tough one to get my mind
around. A lot of, yeah. Well, I was going to say it's also a lot of syllables for a song, but it actually, worked.
It's actually very nice. And if I could sing, I would sing it for you. But
you can sing. I've heard you sing. So tell me again one more time the words.
Friends, do not despair. A difficult time is upon us. Our joy must fill the air.
Interesting.
Which is probably a loose translation.
A riff on it. Yeah.
Said.
Well, it's certainly resonant with Rabbi Nachman, and I don't know if it's coincidence or if you're just aware that Likutei Moharan is the work of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. So that's exactly where I was about to turn.
Oh,
so
cool.
Yeah, this was sort of Rabbi Nachman's magnum opus, one cannot reduce Rabbi Nachman to anything, to any one idea, because he was just a gigantic soul filled with infinity and brilliance and curiosity and strangeness. But one of his concerns, one of his focal points was the power of simcha, the power of joy. So again, here's the same word. Before I talk about the importance of simcha to Rabbi Nachman, what I want to point out is that Rabbi Nachman was not born happy. Rabbi Nachman was not wired to be happy. Rabbi Nachman put enormous effort into being happy. This is a guy who was very, very well attuned to his shadow side. And it's clear from a lot of his work. It's clear from a lot of stories about him that this, perhaps this explains why simcha was so central to his thinking, because he had to work for it. But he makes this astonishing statement, and I think I shared this with Corey some time ago. Mitzvah gedola lihiyot b'simcha tamid. It is a great mitzvah to be, he literally says, b'simcha, like in happiness, tamid, to be in a state of happiness always. So just like take him at his word there for a minute. Just read that literally. It is a great mitzvah to be joyful always, tamid. It's an astonishing statement. Among other things, it's incredible because you don't just add mitzvahs, right? I mean, who decides what a mitzvah is? God, right? God decides what a mitzvah is, and the rabbis expanded on it in the Talmud. But just to declare that it's a mitzvah, he's not just saying it's a really good thing. He's not just saying we should try. It is a mitzvah. It is a commandment of God, according to Rabbi Nachman, to be in simcha, and not just to be in simcha, but to be in simcha tamid. to be in simcha always, continually. Okay, and and to make every effort to determinedly keep depression and gloom at bay. Now, I want to be really, really clear here, because I think a misinterpretation and a self-damaging reading of this text would be to say that if I feel sad and depressed, then I'm sinning, or I'm betraying God. That is not. I don't think that's the power of this verse. I don't think Rabbi Nachman is trying to scare anyone into being happy, because that obviously doesn't work. So I don't want that to be the interpretation. But I think that what he is saying, in a way, it just goes back up to the opening verse from the Psalms, that to be in relationship to God is to be fulfilling a purpose. And therefore, to not feel the joy of purpose in your life means that you're sort of not aware of really your central task. You may be doing the thing, you may be living out in the world, but you're not really thinking about what is your central task. And I think that the implication of this verse is, if you're aware that every moment of your life you are fulfilling a purpose, and if you can live with that sense, and for, of course, the way Rabbi Nachman would unapologetically put that is, you're constantly in service to God. If you can remember that, then you will naturally be besimcha, and therefore it is a mitzvah to always be in simcha. So my point in this, again, is not to make us feel badly when we have feelings of sadness or depression, but rather to say that our happiness is so linked together with a sense of our purpose and a sense of our relatedness to other people and our obligations to them, and our obligations to God to identify the gifts that we each have that enable us to bring goodness into the world. And when we can tap into that, then we can be besimcha. That's kind of the Jewish idea. And the last thing I will say, and then I'll turn it over to my able friend, Corey Pressman, is that I don't know if it's ironic or paradoxically, when we chase simcha, when we chase joy as a thing in and of itself, that is, when we look outside for it and try to get these things that will make us happy, that's when we're in this labyrinth within which we will find no happiness. So I guess my final take on this is that the more we are kind of turning inward and asking ourselves, am I happy? And then trying to address that by looking outward to get things to make us happy, the less happy we will be. On the other hand, the more that we're tuned into a sense of purpose and relatedness to other people and to God, the more we can focus on our true purpose and then discover happiness in process of living that out. So that's a take on the Jewish tradition. I will probably circle back, the Jewish tradition in terms of happiness. I'll circle back to this text a little bit later when I talk about some of the practices. And if there aren't any questions, I'll turn it over to Corey. All right, brother, do it.
Okay, I'm gonna take screen sharing from you. That was really beautiful, thank you. That was so insightful and it makes all these things, like the truth is always so simple, but not easy.
Right.
So you kind of hear how simple the truth is and it resonates. You're like, oh yeah, that's all it is. But then actually living that and enacting it.
That's right.
Very difficult. But at least the figuring out stuff is easy. And
right.
People like you make that easier still. I love the conceptualizing of joy as something that's epiphenomenal. You know, joy happens as a result of something else.
Right.
And so if you're focusing on the joy, it kind of slips through your fingers. But if you're focusing on the other right thing, then you're cruising. And so I want to kind of reframe what you've said and reinforce what you've said using the psychology, kind of like what we did last time.
All right.
And the implications from that. So let me share screen. Am I already sharing my screen? No.
No.
Oh, I'm gonna be. Any minute now. All right. Can you see my screen? Yes. So we had talked, thank you. We had talked last time about the anatomy of stress and the need for, you'll recall, everybody has a strain threshold, a threshold beyond which things are perceived as a threat, and you go into that stress state. And not only do we all have our own strain thresholds that are idiosyncratic to us, there's you and your strain threshold, but then also your strain threshold changes from minute to minute. It's a dynamic thing, your dynamic strain threshold. And so you might wind up, if you are really taxed and don't have a lot of personal energy and you're kind of bugging out, you're not going to have a lot of ability to keep your strain threshold big enough to not perceive just about everything as a threat. Are you familiar with this state of mind when you're kind of anxious and everything seems threatening? And the answer to this really is to manage the internal sense of energy that you have so that your strain threshold is kept as open as possible. And that you went so that even when you flipped out of stress and into your parasympathetic nervous system and you're using your cortex again, that you also have enough energy to enact what is right. And it's somewhere in there, figuring that out, and the psychology and anatomy of that, that brings us right back to the wisdom that the rabbi was teaching us. And they all kind of hold hands in such a beautiful way. And all of this dynamic is mediated by something that the psychologists actually call vitality. And I love when science and religion actually wind up using the same words. But in self-determination theory, in the psychological theories that I'm referring to, vitality is so wonderfully defined. They define it basically as the subjective sense of energy available to the self. And I always dig when the scientists are talking about things that seem, that are somewhat intangible and are intuitively we know are there, but then they spend all this time testing it. And the scientists behind self-determination theory have been doing this since the 70s, which is suddenly a long time ago. It didn't used to be. It used to be very new research, very cutting edge, and now it's ancient. But they have thousands and thousands of hours of study and endless papers. And basically what they've determined is that vitality, which is this, I'm going to write something. So we have a pin in here, subjective energy. And by the way, my handwriting is really bad. It goes back, I blame my 4th grade self. If you have a problem with what I'm writing, just raise your hand, and so, or someone somehow indicate to me and I'll read my stuff back to you. But vitality, yes.
No, I'm not.
Are you?
No, I'm not kidding. What is this stuff over here? These squiggles.
These over here?
Yeah.
I can see what you're pointing at.
Yeah, good point.
This is, but I think I got it. This was the strain threshold. And so the threshold beyond which something outside yourself is perceived as a threat and then becomes stressful. And so I kind of see it as a window. Sometimes the threshold is really big and you don't perceive something as a threat, but then that same amount of information could be very threatening if your threshold is low. Make sense? All right. So dig this. One's vitality, the subjective sense of energy, has been, even though it's subjective, it's measurable. And what they've figured out basically is that when people are vital, they experience a sense of enthusiasm, aliveness, and energy. It's associated with feelings of vigor. Does this sound familiar? Activated positive affects, they call it. In other words, feeling happy. Calm energy. Vitality represents energy that one can harness. This is the scientific language, dig this. Vitality represents energy that one can harness or regulate for purposive actions. What kind of actions? Purposive. It's such a cool word. Acting on purpose, which is the very opposite of being stressed. You're not acting on purpose, then you're fighting, flying, freezing. But when you're acting on purpose, it's vitality that allows you to do that. And so if you're going to be a servant, not of Pharaoh, but a servant of God, that has to be done on purpose. As the rabbi pointed out, you weren't born with this, proclivity. You have to work at it. If you're going to work at it, you need this vitality. So in vital states, they've actually measured that not only do you feel better, but it renders people more resilient to physical and viral stressors and less vulnerable to illness. So it's even associated with your immune system. So vitality clearly is something that's very important. Wouldn't it be cool if we knew the sources of vitality so that we could design a life that makes us as vitalized as possible. Do we agree that would be cool? Have a thumbs up on that's cool.
Yes.
Right on. So amazingly, that we know the sources of vitality and more, I mean, I'm so grateful for this. Speaking of gratitude, there are only 4 main sources of vitality according to self-determination theory. And it's pretty intuitive, but track with me here. And just to kind of remind us what we're doing, throughout the course of any given day or lifetime, as above, so below, there are times where you're spending vitality or using vitality to get something done. And then there should be times where you're gaining vitality. But what so often happens, and I think we're all familiar with this dynamic, you're spending vitality like mad, like let's say there's a pandemic, something like that's going on, but then you're not attending to your sources of vitality, maybe because civilization has vilified happiness, or all the things required for vitality are frowned upon, or you don't feel you deserve them. And so you wind up in this kind of situation, a very V negative situation. And if you stay that V negative, I'm making this up now, but you with me? If you stay that V negative for that long, you wind up with a kind of a chart that looks like this. And that's no good. That's basically a zombie. So we want to have a nice, rigorous, vital oscillation going on here. Vital oscillation. But you can't have vital oscillation if you don't attend to the sources of vitality. Spending vitality is really easy. Just read the news. Just wake up. Just suffer. Easy enough. Got it. That's just going to happen. Suffering, no problem. But counteracting suffering with vitality, it takes work, but we can do it. And we should do it because behaving, I hate saying should too. It's important. If you know me, you know should is the dirtiest word I know. So if I'm saying should, I must really mean it. You should do this because if you remain vital, then you can be a servant of your purpose. If you're a servant of your purpose, then you're a servant of divinities. And if you're a servant of divinities, you're fulfilling the mitzvah of perpetual joy. Yes? Is that good enough reason to be vitalized? I'm convinced. So are there sources of vitality? Say yes, please. Someone say yes. Call and response. There are 4. That's right, Ann. There are 4. So let's go through them. The sources of vitality. Sources of vitality. And again, I apologize for my handwriting. And I also apologize, I'm going really fast. This is the kind of stuff that we could take an entire college course. This could be an entire 10-hour hangout. But I'm just going to kind of rip through it and lay it on you. But you guys are tracking. So sources of vitality. The first and the most important source of vitality, according to science, is not surprising really, is autonomy. But essentially, when you're engaged in work or activity of any kind, let's call any activity work, when you're doing something and you're doing it because you intrinsically want to, and we're going to thin slice this in a minute, but this is something that's coming from within you. It's something you really want to do. That is very vitalizing. And I think you're all familiar with that. But more probably, sadly, or let's not even judge it, just admittedly find ourselves engaged in activities that we're doing not because we intrinsically want to, but maybe for some extrinsic reason, like just for the money or because we feel bad if we don't. And when you're behaving that way, you leak vitality. Are you familiar with that feeling? There's actually a physical feeling I get when I leak vitality. I feel it in my solar plexus, and it gets me stressed out pretty quickly. But if you're behaving in a way that's motivated externally only, it's very devitalizing. And if you're devitalized, you remember the cascade, that you can't access joy and volition. What the scientists call it? Purposive action. You can't have purposive action, and that's what this is all about. Anyone could be non-purposive. Stones are non-purposive. But if you want to be purposive, you need to be behaving how? What's the first source of vitality? Someone tell me how? With what? With autonomy, right. Behaving with autonomy. We're going to come back to this because that is so important, but I want to get the other ones down. How many did I say there were?
4.
4. How many do we have here?
1.
How many are left then?
3.
They're good at math.
Paying attention.
Oh, I needed another minute, and I would have been there. Give me another minute.
You're still going. Like, see, yep. Very few math classes at yeshiva. So, competency is the second one. Competency is basically when you're engaging in behaviors and you feel effective in what you're doing. It's a little different than how it's used vernacularly. But competency basically means that when you're behaving and you feel appropriately challenged and effective. Are you familiar with being asked to do something that is just clearly impossible? Yes? So hard to do, and you leak vitality like mad when that happens. And really, it's painful. There's a physiological aspect to it. Like I said, I get it in my solar plexus. My vagal nerve gets triggered. I go into fight or flight. I'm bugging out. Similarly, have you ever engaged in behaviors that are just way too easy for you? This is not a challenge. Why am I doing this? Why am I wasting my time on this thing that could be a useful challenge for someone else, but isn't a challenge for me? What a mess. This is robbing me of vitality, which is robbing me of my potential for purposive action and the mitzvah of perpetual joy. I must stop. However, if you're engaged in behaviors that are appropriately challenging and you feel effective at, nothing feels better, really. It's amazing. And this is a good point, even for like surviving the doldrums, if you will, the loss of vitality that happens in quarantine, where you're not doing much, so you're not being very effective at much. But even just setting yourself up with some puzzles or some word puzzles or actual physical puzzles, doing something that's an appropriate challenge will stop you from leaking on that competency level. But really, we're really talking about higher stakes, though. It's sort of in designing a life and accessing joy. So one of the ways to access joy is to behave in such a way that is autonomous. And then this other one, this competency one, where you're feeling effectively challenged. You grooving? Isn't this exciting? We're halfway through, right? 2 is half of 4. So then there's third one. It's one that Rabbi Rose was talking about a lot. Relatedness. That you gain vitality when you're engaged in behaviors that relate you to other people in meaningful ways. And this is meant as sort of the other people immediately around you. And I bet some of us go to work environments or environments where we just can't relate to the people around us. Very difficult. And we don't feel effectively, meaningfully connected to them. And that really hurts. It robs you of vitality. It's a loss of vitality. Similarly, it also means to the world at large, just related to the universe. If the work you're doing doesn't relate you to the universe, you feel like you're leaking that vitality. Have you leaked vitality from that before? Some of you maybe, where you're engaged in things where I just can't relate to the people I'm with. This doesn't relate me to the universe or to divinity or anything that matters to me. However, this is an amazing potential source of vitality. I'd say quarantine, I keep jamming on quarantine because that's why I'm still in this room that I've been in for the past 2 months, because you lose a lot of relatedness. That's why I'm so jazzed to be here with you people today. After I did this last week, I felt like high for 3 hours. It was amazing, just from being all the relatedness from this. Feels so good. So relatedness is essential. And I'm going to lay the fourth on you because I promised 4. And while I try to figure out what that fourth one was, I can tell you that these 3 are sort of the big 3 of self-determination theory, ACR. That if you're behaving autonomously, competently, which means properly engaged, not good at what you do, and relatedly, then you're getting vitalized. This is how you get B+. But there is that fourth, and this is one that is nascent in self-determination theory. They're actually starting to groove on this and publish about it. It won't surprise anybody in this call, but I'm glad the scientists did all the work to tell us that an indivisible source of vitality, you cannot live without vitality gained from nature. That connecting to nature, proximity to nature provides vitality. Are you familiar with this feeling? I think anyone in the Northwest sees enough green on any given day that you gain vitality just from seeing all of this green. Living only and being only in architected environments or in computer interfaces is an excellent way to leak vitality from your requirement to be interacting with the natural world. It doesn't necessarily mean forest bathing, which is really popular now, the idea of walking in forests just to relax your mind. But if you even live in a desert, I think it has something to do with the sky, with just the scale that nature provides us. Just that minimizing that is required. It's hard to have hubris when walking outside anywhere. I feel like every dandelion is better organized than my entire life. And so many lessons to be learned from nature. And it's not just being outside. I think this also works with pets and your meow kitties and your doggies. Yeah? Isn't that vitalizing to have those relationships with animals? House plants, I spend a lot of time with this spider plant right now. We are buds. And that was a pun. That was a pun. Thank you. Thank you. I'll leave that alone. They're the root of all evil puns.
Those are really bad.
Bad things can stem from this. I'll keep going. It's a dirty one. So, if you can attend to all of these sources of vitality, look how amazing this is. You're living a life where you're being asked to spend vitality. But if you're sure to design a life in which you're behaving intrinsically, and I want to go into a little more detail about that, you're setting yourself up to be appropriately challenged wherever you are. You, on purpose, put yourself around people that you dig and that you can relate to, and you're doing work that connects you to the world and to divinity in a way that makes sense, and you get as much nature in your life as you want, then you're getting the vitality required to be a vital person and to have access to joy. This isn't about being happy. This is about gaining vitality. They're different things. Happiness isn't possible without vitality. So are a lot of other things not possible. But if you want happiness, just like the rabbi was saying, joy is epiphenomenal. It's a result of something. It's a result of a certain relationship with divinity, and a certain sort of purposive way of living. I'm going to keep using that word. It's my new word. And all of that's not possible without this vitality. And I like to watch this, Rabbi Rose, the eraser. Touche. So you got your highlighting, but I got the eraser. I like to write this as an acronym to remind myself: autonomy, competency, relatedness, and nature. What does that spell, everybody?
Acorn.
Acorn. Thank you. I was kind of hoping we'd all sing Acorn right now, but that was good enough.
I thought you were going to go snark.
I do that with with church groups. I do snark. So Acorn is a beautiful thing. It's kind of this, it's this seed from the elm tree of our happiness and vitality grows from this acorn. But pretty much anything I'm about to engage in, I do an acorn test for. I'm asked to participate in a project, or to partner with somebody, or do this with the rabbi, or teach a class, or get a job, or join a group, or any go bowling with somebody. It's like, well, is this something I really want to do, or am I doing it because I just feel guilty? I just feel guilty. Okay, that's down arrow. Bowling, do I feel appropriately challenged? Actually, I'm so bad at bowling, I will never learn. It makes me feel terrible. It's beyond me. So now that's 2 down arrows. The person who asked me to go bowling is kind of a jerk. I was only doing this, I feel guilty because he has no friends, because he's a jerk. There is no nature in bowling. This bowling opportunity is V negative. Should I go bowling? Congratulations, you passed the SATs of spiritual life. No, or if you do, know that if you are really spending some vitality, and as soon as possible to attend to the sources of vitality. Maybe afterwards go for a hike. You with me? Isn't that fun? Could I just throw in one more thing, Rabbi?
Yeah, no, actually, give yourself I think this is very valuable. So you take the time that you need. The things that I have are more like dialogical reflections on what you have. So please take more time.
I'm just eager to hear what you have to say, but I will keep going. So there's this. Are there any questions about Acorn? I want to dive into autonomy a little more because it's so important. Is Acorn resonating? Is where you promise to do the Acorn test when you do new things? And yes, promise? Prometa. It's somewhat promise, Anne? That's sideways from?
They each have to be a continuum, don't they? Where, not everybody needs the same level of autonomy, and not everybody needs the same level of nature. So you can look at those, I can look at those right now and say, how competent I am at something affects my happiness, my level of wanting to do it, not very much at all.
Right, so
except
I'm glad you said that. This is important to remember in all of this work. And it's in the DNA of how we're even defining vitality. It's all very subjective. And you get to learn for yourself what matters to you most. And so this is why it's not very mathematical. If you were doing your own Acorn, you just might not weigh the competency part all that much. It doesn't matter. You can even just be like, no, won't even be using that as a measure. So feel free to be really fluid with this and keep it super subjective. It's actually important that you do and understand yourself and where you're coming from in this. More importantly, it's important that no matter how you mix your acorn, that's a terrible use of this metaphor, no matter how you mix your acorn, whatever the active ingredients are of your acorn, that it's helping bolster your subjective sources of vitality. If only so you can tackle the things you want to.
Right.
Heather, did you have a question? I saw you turned your video on.
I did. I think you just answered it, actually. I was going to broach the subject of that many of us may have friends or cousins who are born and raised in Manhattan and have very little nature component in their lives and would claim they don't need any.
Right. And maybe they don't. I would disagree. And in the middle of Manhattan is beautiful Central Park. And they certainly plant trees everywhere, and there is that. And you have your pets and your houseplants. I think actually the spider plant got its real kick in 1970s Manhattan. But yeah, I think based on your family of origin could depend on what this mix is. And I know people who are related junkies and other people who don't need that all so much. Really, the most important one is autonomy, as we'll discuss. But this other mix is really just up to you. And by nature, it really doesn't mean, I'm not treating it with the nuance it deserves. It doesn't necessarily mean long walks in the forest like we get to do here, but more just interacting with the natural world in some way.
Yep. Thank you.
Which is important. Yeah, you're welcome. So I'm going to erase this board. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes. Should I take a picture of it first?
Good idea.
I feel I should. I feel I should. I feel I should. And I have.
You should.
I have. Okay, you ready? Well, I'm going to blow on it. Okay. So let's dig into that autonomy piece. And I'm really curious to dovetail this with what the rabbi was saying. And you had mentioned, Anne, that all of this exists on a continuum. And it's true, there's sort of a continuum of relatedness, continuum of approaches to nature, et cetera. And there's a continuum for autonomy. And that's what I wanted to focus on for a minute, to give you a better idea of what I mean by behaving just because with intrinsic motivation, because you want to. And I want to thin slice that a little bit and really come down to how this can be a spiritual path that we're defining, something that's higher stakes than just, well, I want to do it, so I'm gonna, or I don't want to do it, I'm not gonna. It's not that. Autonomy is not that. It's something a little more powerful. So may I jump into this a little bit? Because I want to. So on this side of the scale is a word I've been using that maybe you're familiar with, the idea of extrinsic motivation. Have you heard that phrase before? Extrinsic motivation, being motivated outside yourself. There are motivations coming extrinsically. Oh, I like this is the dance for extrinsic motivation. Feel free to do any of these dances that we're inventing right now. And then there is, I can't dance and write at the same time. On this side, intrinsic motivation, or being motivated from within yourself. And maybe the dance is like this for that, where you feel it in your core, and now I want to do it. And if you treat this as a continuum, there are kind of way stops along here, along this continuum that the psychologists recognize, and I think we'll recognize too, because they're describing us. For example, one can behave in such a way that your motivation is primarily reward or punishment. Are you familiar with doing something for fear of punishment or only for reward? Yes? By the way, I want to point out, this is extremely motivating. This is not a scale of least motivating to most motivating. Few things are more motivating than a bag with $1 million of cash in it. That will definitely motivate one. Or fear of punishment, being threatened physically, will motivate you for darn sure. So it's not about that, it's about something else, as we'll see. But let me show the next one, then we'll get the idea. This one is actually my personal favorite motivator. Maybe this resonates with you. Guilt and pressure. When you're motivated because you feel you just should. You'd feel bad if you didn't. You with me on this one? Or pressure. Everyone else is, so I should too. And that's also an extremely good motivator. Have you ever been motivated by guilt or pressure before? Claim it. Yeah, I hope so. It's part of that human condition. Just like we were saying, like this is like almost non-purposive action. Like it's easy. This is the default. If you just float around like human flotsam, then you're just behaving basically for reward, punishment, guilt, and pressure. But interestingly, even though these are very motivating, they're not very vitalizing. So I would put the vitality like down here for these guys. And that's kind of the point. It's not just behaving or being motivated. This is quite motivating, but not vitalizing. So much so that if you did something for reward and punishment, guilt or pressure, your chances of doing it again are only as strong as much as that reward or punishment, guilt or pressure are applied again. Make sense? You won't intrinsically do it again. So very devitalizing, which again, I'm not judging per se, but if you don't have vitality, then you can't have purposive action, and you can't do those things that are difficult and experience that mitzvah of perpetual joy. So let's jump over the middle section and talk about this spot here. Now we're going to get intrinsic. So everything I talk about in this portion are the things that are motivating from inside yourself somewhere. And this really important stop here are your values, the things that you value. And this is easier. This is one of those things that's easy, or simple, but not necessarily easy. But it's worth taking the time and actually doing some exercises to explicitly articulate the things you value. For example, I value friendship, imagination and creativity, and love, and the creative potential of other people. Let's say something like that, like 4 or 5 things I value. Outside of that, it's like the value, it goes down pretty quick outside of that, but that's my continental shelf of value, and off of that, it slips away. I can pretty much put it down to love and creativity. Those are my 2 main there. I've done the work in front of you. That's what it looks like. Doesn't necessarily take long, but if you want to talk it through with someone like the rabbi, it would be wonderful to see on a piece of paper when you're done, maybe even written in Hebrew, what your values are. Because once you know those and you know you're behaving from your values, you're behaving in such a way as to give you optimal, what's the word I'm going to say? Optimal what?
Vitality.
Yes, optimal vitality, which also sounds like the name of a terrible like nutraceutical of some kind. But you get 1 bottle of optical vitality at the end of this talk. But you're now behaving from optimal vitality, which again brings you back to propositive action, etc. Next to your values, which are relatively easy to articulate, take some time. It's always worth talking to a friend, a loved one, the rabbi. Call me. We'll work out what your values are. Over here is how you identify as a human being. We have very many identities as people. The older you get, the more identities you get. That said, your identities are relatively finite batch of things. For example, I'm a teacher, an artist, a writer, a dad, a husband, a friend. I'm kind of running out of identities now. I'm like a Grateful Dead fan. They're getting thinner and thinner. Thank you, Rabbi. They're getting thinner and thinner. But ultimately, I have a core set of identities. And those identities, if I'm behaving because of my identity, then I'm gaining what? What's that word?
Vitality.
Vitality, right. I'm getting so much vitality that I'll likely do those behaviors again without necessarily needing any extrinsic motivation at all. So this is as motivating, but more vitalizing. This over here is servant to Pharaoh. This over here is servant to something else. Yes? Something more purposive, something more written into who you are. That's very vitalizing. It's a beautiful thing. One more stop, though. We'll come back to this gorgeous place in a minute. One more stop, and that's over here. This needs to be discussed. The most intrinsic you can be, because frankly, your identities and values are borrowed from the outside world and incorporated into yourself in a way. So they're intrinsic, but they're extrinsically sourced in a way. But the deeper you go into your intrinsic, you wind up down here. Did I explain what IE stood for yet? I didn't. I'm sorry. It stands for interests and excitement. The things that interest you and excite you. How many things are there that interest and excite you? So many for me right now. Just about, I'm almost done with all the science fiction on Netflix. But one show after another. I'm really, all the things that we're into, all the shows we watch, the art we do. I'm really into pour over coffee right now. I'm curious about the world of mustard. There's endless things we can get. Mustard's fascinating, by the way. There's all these things you can get interested in. But those interests and excitements, living just based on that is actually a little less vitalizing than behaving from your values and ID. It's kind of like the vitality curve works like this. And sure, if you were to build a life based on your interest and excitement, it would be more vitalizing than doing something for guilt and pressure, reward and punishment. But your interest and excitements, they spin really fast. These change all the time. What changes slower, what turns slower is this wheel right here, your values and ID. I can almost see it as 3 wheels, where here's like your values and ID. Your values is a big wheel, turns very slowly. Your identities turn, but also turn slowly. They're based on your values. And then your interest and excitements is this cute little wheel right here that's spinning around. And I know 2 years ago, I was really interested in tea, and I was interested in bamboo and paper making, but I didn't become a tea expert because that wasn't my jam. Ultimately, one's jam, not a technical term, comes here. And I know a lot of sort of psychology and pop psychology and self-help and even religious talk centers on this sort of follow your bliss dictum. And I'm down with saying follow your bliss, as long as by your bliss, we mean your values and identity. If I was to follow my bliss at the moment, I don't know how many weird tattoos I would have by now of all these bands I was into, right? It wouldn't make sense. I couldn't build a life on these things that spin so fast. But if you can align your activities and your work, what was that Hebrew word for work you were talking about, or your servitude?
Avodah.
Avodah. If your avodah is from this, it's better than from here, but still not as stable and ultimately vitalizing as your avodah coming from here. So to figure out what you value and what your identities are is work worth doing. And I like to talk about it as your ambition as a human being. I'm not sure how that pans out Hebraically. I don't even like the word ambition per se, but I dig it for this reason. Can I tell you why I like ambition, and then I'll turn it back to you, Rabbi?
Please.
Just say yes, so I feel good.
Yes.
Ambition has the root amb, which is the same as the root for like an ambulance or to ambulate. It means to move. It means motion. And once you get the MOT root, that's nice. Then you get things like, what is your motive, or what's your motivation? Not what's your motive here, what's your motive as a human being? What moves you as a human being? What is your, here's another great use of the root MOT. What is your motif? What's that repeating theme in your life, that motif that keeps coming back? What kind of service is it? What kind of experience is it? And actually the best use of the root is your emotion. When you're very emotional, we often talk about what's moving you. I feel moved, was moved by that, motivated. So that's why I say ambition, because it kind of means all of these things. So I highly recommend you do the internal work of figuring out who you are and why you are. And if you think about it, like I said, it's easier than it sounds, but not as easy as it should be. But I see myself as a teacher, let's say, or an artist. So I'm a teacher of imagination and creativity. Okay, that makes sense. I could wordsmith it for the rest of my life. But knowing that I'm a teacher of creativity allows me to do something like this and get very vitalized from it. And now I get, if someone asks me to do something that's not being a teacher of creativity, I know if I'm doing it, I won't be optimally vitalized, because my autonomy is all around my ambition of teaching creativity. So now I know it's going to be that. And there's all different ways of doing it that are uniquely challenging, and I can get vitality from that way. I can do it with this sweet group of people, which makes me feel so good. And I'm looking out my window at the Oregon countryside as I do this. Can you see how much fun I am having right now? Right? My acorn is hot because I'm on ambition, is how we like to say it. So if you're behaving on ambition, then you're being that servant of God that I think the rabbi was talking about, in as much as this is your specialness. And this gets you access to joy. But joy is epiphenomenal to this. We're not seeking joy in doing this. We're seeking alignment.
Right.
Joy happens because of that.
Right. Beautiful. So truly, truly beautiful. And let me just step back for 1 minute and tell people what's going on. So today I have to get off the phone in just a couple of minutes. I'll get off the call in a couple of minutes, and I'm going to ask Corey to keep going because I know he's got more that he could share with you. I'm getting off early because we're having I'm helping Hannah get ready for a memorial service for her father. That's going to be on Zoom later on this evening at 5. And so that's why I'm jumping off from today's class early. But I do want to just briefly share a couple of reflections, if I might, especially on the acorn paradigm that Corey just shared with us. Now, some of these are going to branch off of what Corey said and be kind of like talk shop for Jews. but many of them align perfectly and are integrated with what Corey said. But I just want to offer some things that might be useful for us to think about in terms of our Jewish lives. So one of the things that came up for me when you talked about autonomy, Corey, and this is something I'd like to explore with you at a different time, what you said makes perfect sense to me, and more than that, it resonates with my experience. You know, when I'm not in a place of autonomy, it's very hard to be feeling like, feeling alive. And what's so fascinating is the idea of autonomy within the Jewish tradition, within the Torah world, is prescribed. It's limited, insofar as there are obligations, things we have to do, and things that we are not supposed to do, like if they fall outside of the realm of mitzvah. So, but what came up for me, though, the way that autonomy does resonate for people who are living Jewish lives specifically, is very often Jewish practice, whether it's going to synagogue or whether it's just practice within the own realm of our personal spiritual lives, can be a big fat bummer sometimes, if we're being honest, right? It can just sometimes be really hard. It's like, all right, I got to do it. The rabbi's doing this thing, and I know he wants me to be there, or I want to tell my mom that I went to Shabbat services this weekend when she calls me next week, so I got to go. Or just a generalized sense of like, I ought to do this, but when we get there, we're not filled with any life and vitality. So I think that one of the exercises that we as Jews should do, and that communities should do, is ask the question, why do I go to shul? Like, why is it that I go to synagogue? Why am I part of a congregation? And why am I living a life of mitzvah in the way that I do? Like, don't take any of those things as a given, but try to reflect on your reason for doing it. If you can't answer the question, I have no idea why I'm going to shul, I have no idea why I'm living as a Jew, then then see your rabbi. Like, talk to your rabbi about that. But those questions might call up for you, you know what? There's a whole bunch of things that don't really light me on fire, but there is some stuff that is really important to me. And that's stuff that I want to be more connected to as a Jew. And it might lead you to, you know what, just I'll give you an example in our shul. For some Jews, the thing that really turns them on, where they feel like they have a lot to offer and they would like to, they would really be in the zone of autonomy if they could lead something on, for example, Tikkun Olam. Well, in our shul, that kind of work is not a very well-developed muscle. And so sometimes figuring out, like, what is the thing where I really feel like I could lead the way, or I want to be involved, or I would be choosing to do this thing. That is, I'm exercising my autonomy as a Jew. Sometimes those are things where, in relationship to your synagogue or your rabbi, you might have to push and say, Rabbi, why doesn't our synagogue do X, Y, and Z? Why aren't we more involved with this? And then your rabbi might say to you, you know what, great, let's do that. So I think that building autonomy sometimes means communally, Jewishly, means expanding the sphere of possible ranges of activity and getting involved to make that happen. Don't take the world around you as a given. So that's one thing that I thought about. And then reflecting on, your journaling or reflecting, thinking about your purpose as a Jew can help you develop the sense that you're not just doing these things out of guilt, but spending energy and focus on those things that are powerful and meaningful to you. So that's one thing. The thing that came up for me on competency, and then again, this one is connected to, this is sort of like Jewish insider talk, and then the last two I'll talk about are more related directly to what Corey said, is think about competency in terms of your spiritual life. Sometimes Jewish practice is not meaningful, either because, oh my God, we're singing, Oseh Shalom again. Like, I've heard this song so many times that's not challenging my mind in any way. I'm not having to learn a new melody. But sometimes we may, like, I rush through the Pesach Zimra, these magnificent prayers that I go through at 100 miles an hour, and you're feeling frustrated in the morning because you're still trying to learn the second line of the thing. And so then your lack of competency can also be deeply draining. So developing competency as a Jew, either through Hebrew, or it does not have to be Hebrew. It could be through more learning. If you want me to lead you through the prayer book and study the prayer book or any other part of the tradition, pushing yourself to grow in knowledge and also in spiritual practices that right now seem beyond you can really do all of the things that Corey's talking about in a spiritual context, developing vitality and joy within those, because you're pushing yourself and your competency. Very often we export to the rabbi our spiritual lives. Well, if the rabbi is going to study and learn and pray, then I'm just going to watch him do that. And that's not going to set anyone's heart on fire. But we can make our hearts sing if we're growing as Jews. The other two things I want to just quickly say are more just sort of Jewish versions of what Corey was saying. One is relatedness. So I talked about autonomy and competency. Now the relatedness part of it. Obviously, Jews are all about relatedness, right? How often do we talk about relationships and community in synagogues? The problem that synagogues have and the problem that Jewish people have is that often we talk about those as being qualities that are in our life, but really it's just a tagline. So, but when we are creating Jewish community, it's just a fancy word for being in relationship to other people. So look for Jewish contexts in which you can connect with people through the shul, when God willing we can get together again. Having people over for Shabbos dinner, which God willing we'll be able to do that again soon. But I'm
available for that.
All right, you're in it. You're on it.
I'm available for dinners, yeah.
And so that's one thing. Really trying to manifest the relatedness to other people that being part of a synagogue community offers you. The other thing is relatedness to God. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute because it connects with the last thing I want to say. But I want to ask Corey about this thing. What do you? When I study Torah, one of the things that I realize I love about it is not the content, but I feel like I'm in relationship to this living document, and I'm in relationship to the rabbis who I'm connecting with, who have studied it over the last 2,000 years. Can we be in relationship to a text or to a work of art or something, or is it only people?
Oh, I believe for sure you can feel relatedness to, well, if you think about, you're not related to the actual words of the page or that particular edition, let's say, that you're reading. You're related to all the people behind it and God behind it.
Right.
So it's the art and copy, if you will, acts as a portal to connect us to others through space and time.
Yeah.
You're connected through time to ancient rabbis and to everyone else reading the Torah at that moment.
Yeah.
And to the
it's
author.
So true. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a real feature that, as you develop more and more Torah, like one of the things in the Torah study group, the people who meet with me on Fridays, I'm trying to give you a sense of is who Rashi was. And so when I talk about these commentators, I want you to get to know them a little bit, because I just take great joy out of that. And the other thing is we can develop relationships to people through Torah, right? That's what Chavruta learning is, as Ann Prahl can happily tell you about the joys of that. The last thing I'll say, and I'm just going to wrap up in 2 minutes here, is the nature piece of this. When you read the Torah, you're reading a document by a people written by a people who lived in deep relationship with the natural world, right? Think of any major scene of the Torah and you're thinking about somebody in relationship to nature. And it sort of sounds silly to say because in a way it's so obvious, but you think about Moses at the burning bush. Earlier today I was talking to somebody about the Balaam story, when he curses Israel and he's looking out over the Jewish people gathered in mass and he's looking over them in a valley. We think of the splitting of the sea. We think of the wilderness. We think of Moses standing over the land of Israel, looking into it. The entire thing is, of course, set in the natural world, and that's where the revelation takes place, on a mountain. So this is something that we have lost as a people for a number of historically interesting reasons that are not relevant to today, we have moved the project indoors, and we've been rediscovering the importance of taking it outside. And I would say that this really should be part of our practice, part of our spiritual practice. I think it's actually essential and vital that our relatedness is not only through Torah, but through the natural world. Many of you have heard me talk about Rabbi Nachman's practice of hitbodedut, of solitary prayer experiences. And I was saying to Corey yesterday, in talking about this, that for Rabbi Nachman, his prayer was a spontaneous prayer that he would do. He said you should go out into the forest, and don't just go out into the forest, go out to a part of the forest where nobody else is and where nobody else has been. Like, that may not be possible for us in Portland, but for sure we can go out to the forest. For sure we can go out to wild spaces and be alone and in solitary relationship to God. And the last thing I'll say, again, on the Kabbalah thing, the Kabbalistic texts are so heavily focused on experiencing God in the natural world. This is not just some touchy-feely Portland, Oregon, hey, let's go out in the forest world. This is deeply embedded in the Jewish tradition. We can, of course, access God anywhere, and we have a special relationship to accessing God through contemplation and through texts, but we view God primarily as the creator of the world. And as such, we can encounter God in a special way through the natural world. And that's something that we need to really reclaim, I think, in our individual practices and communally as well. But those are overlaps with what Corey was saying in the ACORN model: autonomy, competency, relatedness, and nature. So I wanted to offer those thoughts, and I'm going to give the final stage to Corey, and I'm going to jump off. For those who want to follow up on any of this, of course, reach out to me. Otherwise, I'll see you all soon. Thank you so much. I'm taking off. Corey.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Be well.
Lazahana. Hello. We're all alone now. We have a little time left, about 9 minutes. I really love what he just said, obviously, because it reinforced what I had said. But it's nice to see how directly you can relate religious life to the stuff that sort of the psychologists are finding, and that always turns me on when that resonates. If only because our culture values this so much, and to see truth arise in two camps and it looks the same is really nice. Before I go, there's not much more I want to say today. I want to, maybe before I do, I want to open it up to a little more questions if you have any. But because I just can't help but talk, I liked how he was talking about defending your acorn and really being like advocating for your acorn, and how it's really sweet of him as a religious leader in your community to open up that community to that and to design your own experience so as to honor and protect your own acorn and that of the community. And I think that is something that's important to do. That's sort of what life building is about. And even he talked about, like, why do you go to shul? And if your answer really only is for guilt and pressure or some kind of social reward or fear of punishment, and you can't find a way to make it rhyme with your values and identity, then it is something worth considering. What is up with that? And sometimes I think on the surface it's guilt and pressure, like, why are you going to go this week? I don't feel like it, but I should go, and you get that. But then when you get there, hopefully you can find that maturity of perspective to be like, all right, well, actually this rhymes with my values as a human being, and I'm just cranky. But my identity as a Jew and my values of community and communicating with God this way, that's why I'm here. And you can kind of snap to focus. But if there is no focus, if you can't snap to focus and there's no reason for doing something other than these things, then from the psychological perspective, it's probably better to not do those things, but find other ways to gain your vitality and to gain that joy. And still that's a way to gain that mitzvah, interestingly. So enough of me talking about these things. Next time we're going to talk about how to concretize this, how to manualize it, how to make it real, how to take what we've just learned about how stress works, about how breathing works in stress, and what acorn is, and now how do you design this into a life? How does all of this leak into your schedule and become that real? And we can talk about that. But in the time, we have like 5-7 minutes left. Do you want to jam and talk about other things? Do you have questions about what I've said?
It's not a question, really.
Okay, yeah, a thing to say.
First of all, I found that this particular session is loaded. A lot of things to think about. I took notes because that's what I need to go back and think about some of the things you said. I think that the last 3 months in isolation, semi-isolation in my case, but quarantine, has sapped a lot of vitality. A lot of motivation has been lost. And that this perhaps is coming at just the most needed moment. And I thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm sorry you've experienced quarantine that way. There's really no other way to experience quarantine, it seems. It really does eat your entire acorn. You're staying inside because someone told you to. You're not doing any of the things that make you feel challenged. You're not related. There's less nature. It's rough.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad this resonates with you. And I do apologize for the speed we're going through all of this. I'd love to come back and do more work with you all if you wanted to and slow it down. I do this in private practice too, if you want to apply it to your life directly. It'd be fun to do it through the rabbi, but let's talk about it. But as you can see, there's so many implications here. There's so much to talk about. And just look at your own autobiography this way. But really, quarantine is the opposite of acorn.
Whew.
I'm here to say. I know. It's maybe a better improvisational cook. There's that.
Food for thought.
Yes. Ah, that was good. I'll make me get the spider plant back. Going back. I love these plants. Do you all have a lot of plants? Plant people? No?
For sure.
Yes. Yes,
Megan?
I do.
Yeah. They're really sweet. Spider plants in particular, I've learned, are very social. If you put them near other plants, they'll grow to like hug those other plants. They're really beautiful.
It's funny when you said, what is a source of vitality before you explained your acronym? My first thought was sunshine.
Yeah, 100%, right?
Yeah.
That nature hit. And sunshine, it's amazing. We literally manufacture nutrients from the sun, vitamin D in our epidermis. It's crazy.
Yeah.
We eat the sun.
Well,
It's a beautiful thing.
supplements are just not the same.
No, I like the idea of an optimal vitality supplement.
No.
I'm working on it right now.
Well, thanks.
Good stuff.
I'm going to the memorial.
All right. Very well. Thank you all so much. I'll see you next time. We'll talk about making this real. Good to see you, Heather.
Thank you.
Bye, Megan. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Tori.
Ellen. Bye. Bye, Jamie.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, bye.